The Zhou dynasty lasted more than 800 years, longer than any dynasty in Chinese history. But if you actually lived through it, you wouldn't call it one dynasty. You'd call it three different worlds that just happened to share a name. Western Zhou. The king was real, powerful, and feared. Spring and autumn. The king was a prop, and everyone pretended he mattered. Warring states, the king stopped mattering at all, and the states turned into machines built for war. So how does a dynasty stay alive for centuries while its authority dies in public? It starts with one catastrophic mistake, and it ends with violence so normal that nobody even bothers to punish it. Let's begin at the breaking point. 771 BCE, the Western Zhou capital. The ruler is King Yu of Zhou. Yu is pronounced like yo, and he has a problem that sounds small until it destroys a political order. He's obsessed with a concubine named Bao Si, pronounced Bo Si. Legend says she never smiled, not once. The king offers her gold, jade, titles. Nothing works. Her face stays still, cold, almost bored, and King Yu becomes the kind of man who cannot accept no from reality. Along the borders of the Zhou realm stand beacon towers. If raiders attack, soldiers light the fires. Smoke rises. The next tower sees it and lights theirs. Within hours, the signal reaches the regional lords across the kingdom. It's the emergency system. The last line of defense. Every lord knows the rule. See the smoke, grab your army, ride to the capital. One day, King Yu looks at those towers and decides he can use them as a joke. His advisors beg him to stop. This isn't entertainment, this is national security. But Bao Si is there, silent, unimpressed, and the king wants that smile. So he gives the order. The beacon fires flare to life. Smoke rolls across the horizon. And it works, at first. Within days, regional lords arrive with their armies. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of chariots, men who rode for days, some for weeks, thinking the kingdom was under attack. They slam through the gates, weapons ready, eyes scanning for enemies. There are no enemies, no invasion, no crisis. Up on the walls, the king is laughing. Bao Si, finally, smiles. The lords do not. Imagine their faces. Dust-covered armor, exhausted horses, and the realization that they were dragged across the country for a punchline. One lord reportedly mutters that he will never move his men for that fool again. They turn their armies around and go home. Humiliated, furious, but they swallow it, because he's still the king. A few months later, real danger appears. A coalition of raiders and rival forces moves toward the capital. This time, the threat is real. King Yu panics. He orders the beacons lit again. The fires blaze, the smoke rises, and nobody comes. The lords see the signal and hesitate. Some suspect it is another joke. Others decide that even if it is real, they have no reason to save him. One lord basically says that the king can light every tower in the kingdom, and he still will not move. The invaders reach the capital. They break through the gates. King Yu tries to flee. He's caught and killed. The palace is looted and burned. Bao Si is taken away, never seen again. And with that, the Western Zhou collapses. Not because an enemy was stronger, not because the system was impossible, but because one king burned the most valuable thing a ruler can possess: credibility. The royal house flees east to a new capital, Luoyang, pronounced Lu Yang. A new king is installed. Rituals continue. Diplomatic visits continue. On paper, the Zhou still rule, but everyone understands the new reality. The king can no longer command loyalty. He can only pretend it exists. Welcome to the Eastern Zhou. And the first phase of it has a name: the Spring and Autumn period. Here's the key idea. The Zhou king is now a symbol, a brand, a political prop. The real power belongs to regional lords, dukes and marquises, who run their own armies, taxes, and courts. But these lords don't want to abolish the Zhou king openly, because the Zhou still have something priceless: legitimacy. If you dethrone the Son of Heaven, you look like a rebel. And rebels don't get heaven's approval. So the lords invent a brilliant solution: keep the king on the throne and ignore him. They get the best of both worlds. They keep the mandate of heaven branding while acting like independent rulers. This is where the spring and autumn era becomes pure power politics. Alliances shift overnight. Treaties are signed and broken. Marriages become deals. Assassinations happen quietly. And all of it is performed under one shared script that claims loyalty to the Zhou king. Everyone knows it's theater. Everyone participates anyway. To manage this chaos, a new role emerges: the hegemon. The strongest duke becomes the unofficial manager of the system. Not a king in title, but a king in practice. The hegemon calls meetings, leads coalitions, punishes troublemakers, and claims he's protecting the Zhou king. Dinner table version: the king became the mascot, and the biggest bully became the manager. Now, this isn't abstract. We can name names. The most famous early hegemon was Duke Huan of Qi. Qi is pronounced Qi. He understood the rules instantly. The Zhou king is weak, but the symbol still matters. So Duke Huan fights wars under the banner of protecting the king. He holds conferences in the king's name. He punishes other states for disrespecting Zhou authority. It's brilliant theater. He gets the power of a king without being called a traitor. Smaller states obey him. Rival dukes fear him. And the Zhou king publicly thanks him for his service. Everyone knows it's fiction. But fiction, when well performed, becomes political reality. Other dukes copy the formula: be powerful, but pretend you're loyal. And for a while, it works. But if the Zhou king is still sacred, there has to be a line you can't cross. That line gets tested early, in 707 BCE, in a moment that basically announces to the world that the king is powerless. A mid-sized state called Zheng, pronounced Yung, has a dispute with the Zhou king. The king wants to take some of Zheng's land and give it to someone else. Zheng refuses. The ruler is Duke Zhuang of Zheng. Zhuang sounds like Zhuang. The Zhou king tries to assert authority the old-fashioned way. He gathers an army and marches toward Zheng. It's a test. Will the duke back down? Duke Zhuang does not back down. He raises his own army, they meet on the battlefield, they fight, and the Zhou king loses. During the battle, an arrow strikes the king in the shoulder. He falls from his chariot, bleeding. Zheng's forces could capture him. They could kill him. They could end the dynasty on the spot. But they don't. Because killing the king would be regicide. It would turn a political dispute into cosmic rebellion. It would prove heaven withdrew its mandate from Zheng. So instead, Duke Zhuang sends a message that is basically ancient passive-aggressive diplomacy. He says that he deeply regrets the unfortunate accident and he wishes the king a speedy recovery. The king retreats, wounded and humiliated, and everyone understands the new truth. A duke shot the king and nothing happened. No punishment, no retaliation, no coalition to avenge the Son of Heaven. From that moment, the spring and autumn world stops pretending the king can enforce anything. The symbol remains. The power is elsewhere. For the next 2 centuries, the states keep fighting under the Zhou banner because the banner still helps. It turns conquest into restoring order. It turns ambition into protecting tradition. But over time, even the old aristocratic rules of warfare break down. The wars get bigger, the stakes get higher, the reforms get harsher. And then, around 475 BCE, the world shifts again. What changed? A simple, terrible realization. The old aristocratic families were losing wars. Not to other aristocrats, but to states that recruited mass peasant armies. Suddenly, a noble force of 10,000 professional soldiers could be crushed by a state with 100,000 armed farmers. Honor can't defeat numbers. Ritual can't defeat organization. One by one, the states abandon the old playbook. The Warring States period begins. This is no longer noble politics with rituals and limits. This is total war. This is survival. The states become centralized machines. They build bureaucracies, they standardize taxes, they register populations, they create professional armies, they treat war like an industry. Picture the battlefield now. Not a few thousand nobles in chariots, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, farmers and laborers who used to plow fields. They're not fighting for honor. They're fighting because if their state loses, their families may be enslaved. This isn't aristocratic rivalry anymore. This is national survival. And one state takes this transformation further than all the others. Qin, pronounced Qin. Qin's rise is not magic. It's policy. It's design. In the 4th century BCE, a man arrives at the Qin court. His name is Shang Yang, pronounced Shang Yang. He offers a deal. Let me redesign your entire system. Make it harsh, make it efficient, and I'll make you the strongest state in China. The Qin ruler agrees. Shang Yang is the kind of reformer who makes enemies instantly. He doesn't care about tradition, only results. In Qin, he pushes harsh legalist reforms, rewards soldiers who bring enemy heads, punish failure without mercy, break the power of old noble families, promote officials based on performance. He turns the state into a disciplined machine. Dinner table version, while other states argued about virtue, Qin built a system that made efficiency unavoidable. And the warring states produce horrors that people still tell stories about today. In 260 BCE, Qin defeats Zhou at Changping. Zhou is pronounced like Zhao. Zhou surrenders. Hundreds of thousands of Zhou soldiers lay down their weapons. Qin's general looks at the prisoners and makes a cold calculation. If we release them, they'll fight us again. If we keep them, we can't feed them. So he gives an order. The surrendered soldiers are executed. Tradition says 400,000 were buried alive. Whether the number is exact isn't the point. The point is that people believed it was possible. That tells you what kind of world this had become. This isn't a world where kings are sacred. This is a world where survival is the only law. By the 3rd century BCE, the Zhou king has existed for generations as a ceremonial relic. And then, in 256 BCE, the last Zhou king dies. And something remarkable happens. Nobody cares. No great mourning, no desperate restoration, no armies marching to avenge the Son of Heaven. The dynasty that once ruled all under heaven ends like a forgotten company going bankrupt, quietly, without ceremony, without resistance. But the wars continue. The warring states fight on for another 35 years. Until, in 221 BCE, Qin conquers the last rivals. And the ruler of Qin doesn't call himself a hegemon. He doesn't call himself a duke. He doesn't even call himself a king under Zhou tradition. He invents a new title, Emperor. Qin Shi Huang, pronounced Qin Shu Huang, the first emperor of China. So here's the strange twist. The Zhou world began with a moral idea, the mandate of heaven. Rulers must be virtuous, or heaven will replace them. It ended with a practical idea. The state that organizes best wins. So, which idea survived? The answer might surprise you. Even Qin Shi Huang, the man who conquered everyone, standardized laws, and crushed old aristocracies, still claimed legitimacy in Zhou language. He didn't reject the mandate of heaven. He just said, in effect, that heaven chose him. Every dynasty after him did the same. The Zhou kings lost their power, but their story won. And that story, the idea that power must justify itself, never stopped running. Even today, people still argue about legitimacy, virtue, and the right to rule. The words change, the institutions change, but the pressure remains. Power must explain itself. The Zhou didn't just create a dynasty, they created the logic that every dynasty after them would use to rise and to fall. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Zhou. Sometimes a dynasty doesn't die when the king is killed. Sometimes it dies when everyone sees the king can be harmed and nobody dares to punish it. Sometimes the funeral happens in silence, long before anyone admits the old world is gone.